Welcome to GRE Snacks, snackable episodes about the GRE exam and graduate school admissions. I'm Tyler, the founder of Achievable, and we have an affordable GRE course that gives you everything you need to ace your GRE. A full textbook, videos on key topics, tons of GRE questions backed by our memory-enhancing algorithm, a built-in study planner and essay grader, and full-length practice exam. You can try it out for free by going to achievable.me, and if you like it, use the code podcast to get you 10% off at checkout. Now, let's get started. Today, I've got Dr. Justin Grimes with us from Applied Graduate School, and Mr. Grimes here, Dr. Grimes, excuse me. If you could introduce yourself and just talk a little bit about like your company and why you started it, that would be awesome.
Absolutely. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here on GRE Snacks, Tyler. Dr. Justin Grimes here from Applied Graduate School. And a little bit more about our business. Our goal with Applied Graduate School is to make graduate education more accessible and equitable for all individuals. And the work we do in particular with any client or with any institution is a couple of areas. So, in the first area, we help individuals identify and find graduate programs that will meet their needs. And so, we talk about graduate funding, we help you write your personal statement, get it edited, we help you work through the entire process from the idea of going to graduate school to applying admissions and working with you even within your first year of graduate school as you make that transition because we know it's important. The other sector of our work is more working with institutions, and particularly faculty and departments, where we help faculty identify talent that they want to recruit, admit the talent, and help support them as they matriculate through graduate school. Because we know that process is not an easy one. Not everyone has a effective process or a rubric framework in which they do that work. And so we are here to help individuals successfully navigate this process of graduate school recruitment and admissions. And that's a little bit about the business itself for me, for those who are curious about my educational background, in particular the doctoral degree. My doctoral degree is in College Student Affairs Administration from the University of Georgia. Go Dogs, to anyone listening. And within that, I study and talk about and learn all aspects of college student development, from understanding the environments within college institutions, whether it be 2 year, 4 year, public, private. It doesn't matter, but that is my background. I worked in higher education for 17 years before leaving it all in April of 2022 to pursue my business more full time. And it's been a rewarding experience. I love talking about graduate school and looking forward to today's conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And today we're going to be talking about, a lot of things that are kind of core to your mission, right? Specifically applying to graduate school as a student, whether and being either first generation going to college or just be coming from an underrepresented minority in general. And I think to start things off, I mean, I'd love to maybe have you just share a little bit about your story and sort of your experience with graduate school that we talked about a bit when we were preparing for this call, because I think it sets a nice foundation for kind of how you got here and how you know all this stuff, both on the student side and on sort of the other side, the administrator side.
Absolutely. So for those listening, I'm gonna take you back to the early entry into higher education, which is through, now it's often test optional, but at the time I had to take the wonderful ACT test. And unfortunately, I was never really good at taking this standardized test and got a extremely low score. And as a result, I was a conditional admit into the University of Arkansas. Arkansas is my home state, born and raised. And that story is important because being a conditional admit, it required me to take a remedial course in order to gain full admission. And this is not an uncommon story for many people. And
Right.
so, as a result of that, I took that class in the summer at a community college, passed it with no problems, started my entry into higher education as a first year student at the University of Arkansas. And like so many students that I have encountered and worked with, I did bad my first semester. My first semester GPA was a 1.66 and put me in the position of being on academic probation. And anyone
Hmm.
who has worked in higher education knows it's really incredibly difficult to go from a low GPA to a high GPA when you start out. And that had a huge impact on my entry into graduate education. But I matriculated through my bachelor process, and reached the end of that degree and realized, what am I going to do next? And at that point, my goal was to start working in higher education in student affairs. So talking with mentors, it's like, what do I need to do to get into this thing called student affairs? How do I start working in higher ed? I've been a student leader, I've done all these things. What does that look like? They said you got to go to grad school. You start with a master's degree. And so that's what I did. I started looking at master's programs within the same institution. I really didn't do much research into anything outside the University of Arkansas. And I knew we had a student affairs program. I knew a couple of faculty members, and I applied. And they said, well, before you apply, you got to take this thing called the GRE. I didn't know what the GRE was. They just said it's another standardized test. So I grabbed one GRE manual from the library, very thick book. I think maybe it was a Kaplan book, probably. And I looked at it and said, this is long. I'm already getting through this process. I don't need to look at this any longer. I closed the book, returned it to the library, signed up and paid for that GRE, took the exam under the old scoring scores, was I think it was like 1600, and I got a 690. I'll let you all do the math. That is a failing grade. And I thought that by being this student leader, by having these experiences, and by having this passion and desire, and already being involved in many professional organizations that current student affairs practitioners were in, that I was going to be a shoe in for the student affairs program. And I received my first admissions no. But I had the gift of the director of the program saying to me, "This is not the right program for you, but maybe try this other one. There's one in adult education, and you could choose that as an option, or workforce education." And so that's what I did. I applied for an online master's program. We had two options: adult education or workforce education, emphasis in human resource development. And my thought was, if this student affairs college thing doesn't work out, I'm just gonna go back and work in human resource. I'm already pursuing my business degree in information systems. I like being a part of the business school and things we're learning here, and the idea of hiring, firing people, training people seems pretty cool. So let me go that route. And I completed that online master's program. I had the option to take some classes in class, take some courses in class, in which I did. Great experience. Definitely something I would encourage people to do, even if they're doing the online master's program, if there's an option and they can do that. But I finished that degree, started my career, and about 6 years into that, I realized I don't know if I still want to do if this is the thing that I want to do. I'm working in residential life, and I'm just looking for something different. And I looked at two graduate programs. One
Hmm.
was the University of Georgia, the program I got into, and then one was the University of Texas, Austin. And my two contingencies for those programs, and what I was looking for, criteria for looking for them, is mentors. What schools did my mentors go to? What were the schools that had some affiliation for me? The University of Texas was going to put me closer to members of my family on my father's side, which I didn't talk to that often. I thought that'd be a great
Hmm.
opportunity to develop that relationship in Austin. And I didn't get in, but I got into the University of Georgia, sight unseen. I thought University of Georgia was in Atlanta. I was like, I can go to Atlanta. I just the naivety of not really doing my research into where the school was even located in Athens, Georgia, and really understanding what I was getting into. But they admitted me into the program through a lot of intentionality on my part, meeting with faculty. I actually flew down there, visited the campus, sat in the classroom to get an understanding of what does it look like to be in a doctoral, course, right? And talk with
Hmm.
students and talk with faculty. Some of which I recommend that a lot of people that I work with do if they can have the opportunity to do so. And started
Hmm.
my career while I was in that, working in graduate education, and even didn't even know what my dissertation topic was going to be, and decided to take this one elective in motivation, and that led me into my path of my dissertation around studying what factors influence Black men to pursue graduate degrees in education. Knowing
Hmm.
that Black males are historically underrepresented in education, education isn't always seen as a financial pathway to wealth, regardless
Hmm.
of degree. And I was just curious about why the people who were doing these degrees decided to do that. And I learned a lot about what motivates individuals in life, but more particular, what motivates individuals to pursue graduate degrees. And that has been my educational journey, and I continue on that path with that same research interest. And I say that that degree, that doctoral internship, working in the graduate school at the University of Georgia, both in the recruitment area, the diversity area, the business side of it, gave me a great insight into graduate education. And without that, I don't know if I would have thought about the work that I'm doing now. And
Hmm.
after years of being a recruiter, I found that too many students were like me and didn't understand the process. And I couldn't give you a pamphlet. I couldn't necessarily give you a book to explain the process. So my
Hmm.
thought was, if you can't find it, you got to write it. And that's what I wrote, the book, 20 Questions to Answer Before You Apply to Graduate School, because I wanted individuals to understand the complete process, the funding, the application, the letters of recommendation, everything related to this process. My goal is to help you understand it. And when you finish reading that book, you can successfully apply to a graduate program.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think it also, I mean, for you going through this experience, I think that you also learned a lot, like you said, and you wrote your dissertation on sort of the specific reasons why maybe people who are from underrepresented minorities like don't apply to graduate school as often. Can you speak to that a little bit and sort of what the challenges are or just like what the sort of reasons are?
Absolutely. The short answer to that question is some of the obstacles that are getting in the way for many underrepresented minorities. I'm speak specifically first to racial minorities, and then I'll start tapping into kind of first gen students. And so for often racial minorities, a lot of folks, this is about representation. It's can be challenging to go for something of which you don't know is obtainable. It is hard to see something that is not always represented for you. And so that lack of representation in academia can often cause a challenge for individuals in that regard to pursue this degree. And so that's one of the obstacles is representation. Another obstacle is funding. Like frankly, not having the financial capital and resources to pursue this degree. And so, socioeconomic status matters a lot, not just for those who are underrepresented minorities, but all individuals. But when you lack the funds and you lack the knowledge and understanding and know someone who can guide you through this, it may be really challenging to decide to pursue this. However, that's not stopping a lot of folks from deciding to pursue these degrees. The other thing that I will say that is getting in the way for a lot of individuals is their own fears. I don't have the time to complete this degree. I don't know what I want to do. I don't know where I'm going to do this degree. I'm not sure the process I need to follow to pursue this degree. I know someone who got one, but they didn't have a good experience. People are not using their degrees. These types of things, I think, for a lot of people, are getting in the way.
Hmm.
Some of the reasons why individuals decide to pursue these degrees are for really comes down to often four reasons. One is the desire to enter in academia as a researcher or a faculty member, professor, to engage in that aspect of academia, which is research and learning and development in that way. Second reason people pursue
Hmm.
it is for money, right? So people want to make more money. There may be a promotion attached to it. There may be a career shift or career pivot. And that requirement to make that change is a graduate degree for folks to go into a different field or within their same field. Another major influence is lifelong goal. Many folks have
Hmm.
wanted to be the first or to obtain this degree, and that is another reason why people decide to pursue it. And one last reason I would say people pursue the degree is the
Right.
opportunity to gain more education in the credentialing. The credentialing that the comma, whatever comes after the comma, the network, and that degree presents a level of credibility that people need or they desire to have in order to navigate whatever's
Hmm.
going to happen next for them professionally and even personally. Some of the challenges that exist is the funding on the initial end, right? So not having the financial capital to apply for a program or to pursue one of the recruitment events can be a hindrance for a number of individuals. Another hindrance for a challenge for people is fears. Their own fear about not having enough time, of not being able
Mm-hmm.
to pursue the degree. I haven't written
Mm-hmm.
anything academically in a number of years. I'm an older student. I'm not young anymore. I don't, these are type of things that are narratives and stories that people internalize that often get in the way. And I would say another challenge for folks is really understanding the gravity of the process and what's it going to take to pursue this degree. The idea of pursuing a graduate degree and what you hope to be the outcome is very important. And I tell people knowing your why is going to often sustain you to the end of this degree, but that why needs to be attached to a what. What is it that you want to do next? When you get this, then what? And so individuals sometimes have not thought about the why or the what, but they are interested in the opportunity to pursue it. And they have been gifted students and they've completed one academic process. And so they figure they can do this on another one. And oftentimes they can. Because for me, graduate education, successfully completing it, is a small bit of the intellectual ability of you, but more about your resiliency. Can you stick with this to the end? Can you navigate the challenges that present itself? Can you adapt immediately or long term to reach the outcome that you want? And those to me are often the challenges. Now, when we start talking about the different demographics, I think it's important to think about what data we know about different groups. So, for 1st-gen, for
Mm-hmm.
example, the Center for First Generation Student Success puts out a report, and one of the things they talk about is that I think it's 45% of students expected to earn a 1st-gen students expected to earn a master's, and 19% expected to earn a doctoral degree. And of
Mm-hmm.
that, within a year, often to completing their bachelor's degree, around 23% of 1st-gen graduates go on to pursue post secondary education. So this means that there's a high probability or a decent probability that if you identify as 1st-gen, that at some point graduate education is going to be a part of your educational pathway and career. And so
Mm-hmm.
to me, it's now is a great time to do that. For underrepresented minorities, but we can talk about women specifically. In some areas, women are more present in graduate education. In some areas, they're not. When it comes to
Mm-hmm.
enrollment, we see that males still about a little bit more percentage than those who identify as female pursue the graduate degree. Another
Mm-hmm.
thing to really factor and consider is the data around race. And race and ethnicity is a significant factor in this, and we can talk more about that. But I just
Mm-hmm.
want to share that, the National Center for Education Statistics puts out a report around who's conferred the degree. So who's actually finishes degrees. And whether it was in 1976, I think it was around 89% were identifying as white. And now that number of white individuals who pursue a degree is around just short of 63%. So while we've seen an
Mm-hmm.
increase in racial minorities, Black, Hispanic, Asian Pacific Islander, American Indian, and Alaska Native, the percentage of those who pursue the degree are overwhelmingly white and international. And we could talk about the impact that
Mm-hmm.
has on graduate education, what the future looks like for racial groups, regardless. But that's important to factor in is that who pursues the degree says a lot, and who pursues the
Mm-hmm.
degree also reflects who's providing access and opportunity to the degree. Because that data, those
Mm-hmm.
percentages don't look very different when we start talking about the assistant, associate, full professors who make these often academic decisions and who gains access to graduate education.
Yeah, well, and I think kind of like how the CEO or the boardroom is kind of like the last group to diversify. In a lot of ways, further up the higher education chain is also kind of the last group to diversify, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's something that has been a push for a lot of graduate programs for a while, but it's still, there's like all of the sort of systemic reasons. And then compounding that is the fact that, like you said, most of the people making these decisions are like the people that they're admitting, right? So there's a little,
Mm-hmm.
even if they're trying to combat their biases or, whatever you want to call that, like they still have them.
Hmm.
And there's still
Absolutely.
also the other part of it is sort of the flip side of it, right? Is if you're an underrepresented minority and you're looking at going to a graduate school and everybody else is white, right? That can be intimidating too.
Hmm. That I would agree.
Well, yes, yeah. So I'm curious. Then, I mean, you covered a lot of stuff there that I want to dig in on. I think let's start. I mean, I think that when you covered like why would anyone go to graduate school? I think that all makes sense. Do you feel like there's any, is it sort of, people are going to graduate school, right? Because they're career changers or they're leveling up in their career or they're in a career that requires it in some way in order to get sort of a well-paying job down the road. Um, and that all makes sense to me. But then I guess the follow-up question I had to that is, what do you feel like is sort of making that less likely or less common for the underrepresented groups or the first generation college students looking to move on? Is it like, because again, you mentioned a couple challenges already. You mentioned cost, you mentioned time, and those are big considerations for graduate school for sure, right? You're basically trading 2 years of income for 2 years of debt, and hoping that you make more money on the other side, that it kind of works out.
Hmm.
Do you feel like there are cultural reasons why that's a scarier proposition for somebody who's first generation or from an underrepresented group?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And so, I for me, I often think about, and even the things that I research and read about, why individuals are deciding to pursue post baccalaureate, degrees, particularly first
Hmm.
gen. There's a couple of things I want to distinguish in terms of enrollment and really thinking about the answer to this question in a way that probably be really effective is really thinking about the type of degrees that people are pursuing. And what I mean by type, are they pursuing part time or full time? And I think often in
Hmm.
conversations around graduate education, we center and talk often about the full time enrollees. And to dig deeper in that, we're often talking about the fully funded full time enrollment students. And so if
Right.
we
When
take
you say
that
fully
group.
funded, you mean like they paid for themselves, essentially.
Absolutely. The institution or department has a lot of funds and resources that they are then relinquishing to the student, or not necessarily relinquishing, but they are paying for the education of this particular student. It is not just a payment, it's really an investment. So they're investing a significant amount of money in the growth, development, research abilities, learning, and such in this person with the goal and intention of receiving additional accolades, outcomes, research, whatever it may be after that, right? So there's really an investment in institutions looking at their ROI. Like this person we
Hmm.
invest this money in is going to go on and discover this thing or help us to unpack this thing or learn more about this thing or teach this. And that is a significant contribution on behalf of the institution. But that's still just a portion of folks who pursue this degree. And there are a number of folks who are pursuing this degree, both full time and part time, who don't receive funding. And so
Hmm.
um, I think that plays an important role as to like why underrepresented minorities would or would not decide to pursue this degree. And what I'm saying is individuals have to decide, number one, what do I have the capacity to manage now, right? In my current life, maybe as a parent, as a single parent, as a current full time employee, can I take on more education? That is an important question to consider and think about, and one that is causing a number of URM and first gen individuals to pause. And if the answer to
Hmm.
that question is yes, the next question is how am I going to pay for this? Or who's going to pay for this? Is my current
Hmm.
employer going to offer some funds? Do they have a level of professional development funding or learning funding or something of such that is going to allow me to pursue this degree? And what are the requirements for that? Is it that I can
Hmm.
only enroll in a certain number of hours? And thus that means I can only be a part-time student? What are the other requirements? Do I have to then work for this employer for a number of years post finishing this degree? And so I think that is a factor that is the funding piece of that from the employee. On the other side of the funding factor for first gen and URM students is the question that I pose as well is like, who's going to pay for this and what's the return on investment? That's an important
Mm.
question I often talk with students about who are interested in pursuing this degree and are not going to do this full time. Is what resources are you going to tap into? And unfortunately, there's not enough conversations about what resources, what grants, what fellowships are available for individuals who want to pursue this degree, but may not know or have access to the information to necessarily apply for them. There's a lot of fellowship and resources out there, but maybe the fellowship grantor is not, reaching a diverse market. Who knows what may be contributing to that? But nevertheless, individuals got to figure out how they're going to pay for this. And my thing to students is, what's the return on investment? So you pursue this degree, it costs you $40,000 for this master's degree. What are you going to, what is the financial outcome for you and your career? What are the access and opportunities you're going to receive as a result of this degree? Is it 1 year down the line, 2 years down the line, 5 years down the line? Is it you're going to receive a $2,000 pay increase for a $40,000 degree? I can't say or cannot say that that is a great use of time and resources and energy. But for me, it's I really want to emphasize the importance of thinking about the return on investment, both from the student, but both from the institution. When people are making these commitments to pursue these degrees, they're making a financial, a mental, and emotional decision, and they want to make sure that what they're getting on the other end is completely worth it. Some of the historical factors, I mean, we can look at who has been enrolled and pursue these degrees as a factor. So if you continue to have individuals who have a particular racial bias or a gender bias or ability bias, like we want able bodied individuals, and you look at the individuals within your program and you look at the individuals you historically and provide admissions to and you enroll, that begins to paint a picture. So for institutions, I'm often telling them, look at the data. Same for students, look at the
Mm.
data. Who gets admitted? And so that begins to paint a picture. And if that picture for a historically racialized minority in the United States looks overwhelmingly white, that might be a reason why they decide to go, not to go, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if the faculty is majority white and the students you tend to enroll are majority white, do I want to be the first person or the second person or the one of only to do that? And what does that mean for me in my experience? What does it mean for me to be a black student or Hispanic student or Asian student and to be the only one who looks like me? How does
Mm-hmm.
your identity and experiences as a white or able-bodied person or or person with disability shape how you show up in the classroom as a instructor, as a mentor, as a facilitator of discussion, as a researcher? All these things factor in. And individuals
Mm-hmm.
now more than ever are asking questions related to the things that I'm saying. They're asking, what are your supports for students with disabilities? What are your supports for underrepresented minorities? What are your supports for first gen students, for international students? Do you have anybody who identifies as such? Have you graduated that group? What is your historical data been around completing individuals completing a degree who hold these identities? And I'm hoping that
Mm-hmm.
institutions are beginning to think about this more intentionally and that students are looking at this and asking the question because it does matter, right? And what is your history around offering funding? Is it part-time? Is it whole time? Is it going to change in 2 years? Am I assigned to a particular person or does it shift or change? These are the types of things that can cause an individual, the answers to these questions can cause a person to press pause. But
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, the person has to make the decision that this is something they want to do. So it goes back to that why. Why do you want to do it? For me, I wanted to be the first in my family to complete the doctoral degree. I wanted to be a liaison between what I would classify as the haves and have nots. I wanted to
Mm-hmm.
take the intellectual pedigree and the credentialing that I gained from academia and be able to take it to communities of which I come from. I wanted to be a middle person and liaison bringing access and information to people. And that's the work that I'm doing. That's what I wrote about in my personal statement, what I wanted to do. I feel like that's what my dissertation work does. It exposes both sides. Because people can tell
Hmm.
you that they want more diversity, but do you know why people are deciding to pursue it? If you don't know that, then how are you to get to the more diversity? That's what the central
Right.
part of my research question is. And by understanding that, then we can begin to change our recruitment practices, our enrollment practices, our support systems, both in the department and the institution. And I'm hoping that more people will begin to see this type of research and look at our national data from the Center
Hmm.
for First Generation Student Success, the NCES data, the Council of Graduate Schools, to see what stories are being told. Because right now, the latest report from the Council of Graduate Schools is that graduate enrollment is down. And the
Hmm.
group that is the hardest to recruit and the group that is enrolling at the lowest is the underrepresented minority and 1st-gen. So what that
Hmm.
tells me is if you identify in that group, now is a great time to be applying because institutions are having a challenge. But it also means that
Right.
there's something behind that challenge. So ask some questions.
Yeah, and I guess there's kind of two directions I want to go here, and I'm curious which one you'd rather start with. The first is, from the student perspective, like what are the questions that you should be asking to determine kind of like, get a lay of the land of like how this school really views underrepresented minorities and like, are they just talking the talk or are they really walking the walk with supporting those groups? And then the second question I had is sort of what are some examples that you've seen of schools doing it right, right? Like, what are sort of some good examples that people should look for or kind of ask, programs or things that they should ask about when they're applying to different schools, things like that. So yeah,
Absolutely.
how do you kind of want to tackle those two questions?
Well, let me start with the second one, and then I'll come back to the first one, and they may actually work hand in hand. So
Hmm.
to the person who identifies as a underrepresented minority, biracial minority, more specifically, every year the there's a report put out by Diverse Issues in Higher Education magazine. They present this thing called the Top 100 Degrees Conferred bachelor's, master's, doctoral for historically racial minorities. They put this out every single year. So I encourage you to go to their website. I think it's diverseissuesinhighereducation.com, something to that effect, and look up this top 100 degrees conferred. And on there, you're going to see a list of that. Who graduates the most Black African Americans doctoral students? Who graduates the most Hispanic master students, and a list by
Hmm.
institution. You can even search by program or field of study. You can break it down by not gender, really sex, but they write it as gender, but you can break that down by sex to see that information.
Hmm.
So why is this valuable and important? If I'm a student and I identify as Black or Asian or Hispanic and I want to go to a place, for me, I want to go to a place that has a history of graduating people who look like me. And that is part
Hmm.
of the influence and reason why I chose the University of Georgia. And I'll get to that story in a moment. But really, I encourage people to look at this. If you're an institution and you don't see your name listed on there as a top graduate of these racial minorities, there's work to be done right there. And it begins
Hmm.
important for you to start asking questions. Why aren't we on this list? And if I'm a student or a prospective student, I want you to look at that. Now you're going to see that the number one, the probably in the top three or top five are going to be some of your for profits. Grand Canyon University, Western Governors, Walden University, Capella, Liberty. You're going to see a lot of these, right? And that's important to think about because while they have a track record, understand that for a lot of these types of institutions, you're paying out of pocket, or maybe you get some funding from FAFSA, financial aid, maybe student loans. So that means that conversation around when you hear funded or students who go to school for free, that's not the group that they're referencing or talking about. They're not talking about students at Walden or Capella. They're talking about students that may be at a Harvard or a University of Florida or a Cal system or an NYU system school or something to that effect, right? Or Howard University, Southern University, something, one of those institutions. But what I'm saying, to get back to my point about this top 100 degrees, this is the place that if I was a racial minority, I would go. I want to see who's graduating people who look like me. Now, the next part of that too, beyond this list, is definitely you want to look at U.S. News World Report. It tells a story. Their categories
Mm-hmm.
about how they go around identifying top programs is a little bit different. But I encourage you to look at not just those institutions they list, but how they go about collecting their information to determine who gets on this particular list. And so that's important for you to think about as you're making this decision around where you want to go. Now, I mentioned the story about my decision to go to University of Georgia at the time, and I can't tell you what the current date is, but at the time, University of Georgia was in the top, I think it was like number three. They graduated the most Black doctoral students in education. And that
Mm.
was fascinating to me. I don't know. I think they still put a lot of statistics on their website. But for me, that told me a story. Number one, you admit individuals who look like me. Number two, if you're admitting folks like me, you complete folks who look like me, there must be some supports or something in the institution that is supporting folks to the end. And number three, you have a
Mm-hmm.
track record of doing this because you just don't get
Right.
to number three randomly, right? Like you've been doing this. And so that meant a lot for me as a Black student who at the time was working in Oklahoma, who was quitting his entire career or putting it on pause to work in a different way to pursue this degree. And if
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to make this large decision, this leap from Oklahoma to Georgia, I want to make sure it's worth it, that I'm going to reach the end. Again, if I was a student who identifies first gen, I'm definitely going to look at some of the fact sheets from the Center for First Generation Student Success. They talk a lot about who pursues these degrees, why they pursue these degrees, what are is the institution that I'm applying for have supports for students who identify as first gen. I highly encourage you to look for that information, and that's a Google search, right? And so that's another thing that I would encourage people to look at. Um, Remind me again the first question. I think it was something around why people may pursue these degrees.
No, it was so the first question was kind of when I mean you already answered it to an extent, but it's basically like when you're doing your research as either a first gen or an underrepresented minority student considering graduate school,
Hmm.
right? Like what are the things that you should be looking for, right? Are there specific like or what are the questions you should be asking their admissions officers?
Yeah, I can expand on that. What are some questions that I would
Mm-hmm.
be asking if I identified as a URM or first gen or student in general? What questions do I think students should be asking? Things that I highlight in the book. Um, Personally, I think one of the first questions you need to ask yourself, and I've alluded to this already, is do you want to go part time or full time? Know that those who are going part time is going to take you longer. Your tuition costs
Mm-hmm.
may be it's per you're paying tuition per credit hour, whereas those who may be going full time, who may receive funding from a department, they tend to have a cap, right? So you may be registering for 18 hours and six of those are dissertation, but you're only paying for 12, or the institution gets paying for 12. So you need to
Mm-hmm.
determine what do I want to go part time or full time? Do I want to go local? And by I mean local, like 20, 30 miles, or am I willing to travel? Do I want to go
Mm-hmm.
to a historically Black institution or historically white institution? Do I want to go to a institution in the South? Do I want to go to one in the Northeast or in the West Coast? Where do I want to do this degree? Do I want to do it online or do I want to do it in person? What types of environments do I thrive in better? When I took my distance education class, did I do well in that environment? Could I manage the course load? That's an important thing to think about before you jump into an online program, right? Or another
Mm-hmm.
question I think you should think about is it a graduate degree or should it be a certificate that I start with? Should I consider
Mm-hmm.
starting with maybe taking a class for as a non-enrolled student? That is a thing that I encourage some people who are a little bit on the fence about this is take one class. Now you may not get the credit for it as a non-enrolled student, or you're auditing
Mm-hmm.
it. Let me say it differently. You're auditing the course, but it gets you entry. Now, for those who may or like me, you didn't have the GPA, you didn't have the GRE score, or maybe even
Mm-hmm.
if you're GRE optional but you don't have it, maybe taking one course in the program you're interested in will be helpful. It conveys to
Right.
the program that you know what, this person is serious about this. They're taking this class, this is what they've learned, is what they've done. That is something I would consider doing. Other questions that I think people should really consider um, in this process of applying to graduate school is, what type of program do I want to be in? What's the learning environment? What's the amount of work I'm willing to manage and take on? Graduate
Mm-hmm.
education, unlike bachelor's degrees, this is how I break it down in what I call the 3 C's of education: consuming, contributing, and creating. A bachelor's degree
Mm-hmm.
is about consuming information. You're consuming it, regurgitating it out on English, composition, science, sociology, physics, biology, whatever it is. When you step into the master's degree, you're now a contributor. You're contributing to our knowledge and our understanding of the body of information we have about a particular topic, and you're contributing to
Mm-hmm.
your field of study. But when you want to be the creator, when you want to get the patent, when you want to have your name stamped as the expert on this particular subject matter, that's when you step up to the doctoral level. That's when you step up to the professional schools. That's when you go to the law schools. When you want to be the creator, that is for me the 3 C's: consume, contribute, or create. And so, what do you want to do? You've already consumed, so what's next? Is it to contribute or is it to create? And I think it's an important question for you to think about. And each of those have a different set of expectations and requirements. It is not meant to be
Mm-hmm.
easy. This is why we have less people with these degrees. I think one data
Mm-hmm.
showed, I think it was like maybe less than 14% of individuals in the United States hold a graduate degree. That's not a lot of individuals as we think about a population of folks who live in the United States. And so, what does that look like? For those who identify as international and you're considering pursuing this degree, you're maybe from Haiti, so maybe you're Afro Haitian and you're trying to decide, where do I want to pursue this degree? What does that look like for you? And when you show up, are you going to have to take the TOEFL? And what is that experience like? What supports do they have for you as an international
Mm-hmm.
student? If they have limitations in terms of you can't work or seek employment outside of your degree program because of funding, can you sustain living? Right. So let's talk about people who decide to pursue this in full time. Let's get back to that group. Can you
Mm-hmm.
afford to live on this stipend if you receive funding, or you're gonna have to work outside of that? What other
Mm-hmm.
opportunities are there? And the last thing I want to encourage people to think about is, what are the additional opportunities outside of the degree that you can gain as a result of pursuing this degree? And let me say that in a different way. There are entrepreneurial opportunities that you can dive into as while you're a current graduate student based on the things that you do. So let me give a quick example of something I encourage people to consider. If I am wanting to become a school superintendent and I'm going back to get an EDD and some form of education, I may
Mm-hmm.
begin to have a specialty in a knowledge area around student behavior. So maybe that's a workshop, right? That I then take the course content to flesh that idea out to develop a workshop that I then will do as a consultant or a speaker to school districts. Maybe I am someone who was in, let me say, a business program, right? So I'm pursuing a master's degree in, say, marketing. And I'm particularly interested in the psychology of how women buy products and how do I market my products. Well, that sounds like a great opportunity within this program to gain more insight through a psychology class, through other coursework, to not only understand that, but that is something I can then turn it into a workshop, a product, or something that I can sell and make additional income out of. So it's, for me, it's just not getting the degree for the sake of the credential and what comes after the comma and the other things I named earlier. It's also connecting this to passions, purpose, and other financial opportunities. And for me, what that looks like is every assignment I do is connected back to that why and that what. What do I want my life to
Mm-hmm.
look like? What do I want to achieve? And how can I allow the things that I have gained access to within this degree program to move me towards achieving that? And too often, people don't consider all that's available to them in graduate school. I know a number of students who started podcasts as graduate students,
Mm-hmm.
individuals who have huge YouTube followings based on their ability to teach, the number of folks in STEM programs who are now taking the formal knowledge they're gaining to be creators, right? So now their creation is through articulation. They are translators.
Mm-hmm.
So they know how to translate science to a different demographic or a younger demographic or to an older demographic. They're taking what they're learning in the program and using that to help communities. And that to me is super important. And if you happen to be able to make money off of that, great. And if you just want to do it for the sake of doing it to share, that's great too. But just don't look at the degree just for just the degree. There's so much possibility that comes with this, which is why I love the graduate degree. There's a lot of possibility on a specialized area. That's what makes the graduate degree area. You're studying a specific field, a specific set of content, and you, in essence, become a very knowledgeable and expert, incredible in knowing more about that.
And it sounds, I mean, just like listening to you kind of talk through all this, it sounds like there is a big component of like trusting the value, right? Which I think is interesting because I mean, as a white guy, graduate school, like you never have to, you never question the value of it, right? Like because we grow up kind of with that being a typical thing that people do. It's like, oh yeah, graduate school, it's great for these reasons, or oh, graduate school, that's if you're trying to do X, Y, and Z, it's a good path to do it. But it sounds to me like, especially it makes a ton of sense for first generation college student, right? Their parents are like, you want to go back? And it costs how much? And then, for underrepresented minorities too, it definitely feels like you've got to kind of or you will feel more comfortable attending if you have a plan for it to deliver, much more value than you're going to give it in terms of like the money and time. Is that accurate?
I would say yes, and the and piece of that is to understand that you bring in value, you know. And so
Mm-hmm.
when programs are admitting individuals, they're admitting knowledge, expertise, experiences of those individuals. And in particular, when it comes to underrepresented minorities, from a business standpoint, we know more creative ideas come in the face of more diverse organizations, and more diverse organizations often yield a higher outcome and a higher share of the market. And so, what does that look like in graduate education? When you have more Black students, more international students, more women in programs that are historically male dominated, you get new ideas, you get new opportunities, you increase the value of your program. And that's what,
Mm-hmm.
as I mentioned earlier, these top 100 degrees in diverse issues in higher ed, why that matters a lot, right? Because my guess is this: in my conversations with department heads, with deans, with associate deans, many of them don't even know this exists, right? They don't even know this 100 list exists, and they're twiddling their thumbs and trying to figure out, how do I get these students? Why aren't they applying? Well, did you know you're not even on
Mm-hmm.
the list, right? And so there are factors that students are considering that you haven't even begun to explore or think about. And so that's the and piece, right? That's super important for first gen students in particular to think about, is that value. And so again, I encourage you to those individuals to think about what you're bringing, right? It's not just,
Mm-hmm.
please pick me, please pick me. Enter this process knowing that you bring a set of skills and knowledge that oftentimes is missing, and that you not only are you bringing that, but how you go about doing that may be missing. There are new theoretical frameworks, new methodologies are discovered all the time, and that happens as a
Mm-hmm.
result of work of the individual and their background. So we don't get to learn more about other things and new ways to do things without you being present. So graduate education is better. As I tell people, we're better because you're here. And without
Right.
you, we may still be at the same position. So if we want graduate education to look different, if we want our future of our faculty to look different, and I tell this to departments and really, college presidents and others, your future faculty are your current undergrads now. So I highly suggest you really talk and advocate for graduate education at the undergrad level, but even in the high school and middle school. When I was working with a program for translation, biology, and other, health sciences, I always encourage my students to go and do programs and work with the local school district, because that's
Mm-hmm.
the group. If you tap an interest a sixth grader, they're not going to forget this. And that sixth grader who experienced that experience with that graduate student, regardless of your racial, ethnic, or gender background, may now have an interest. And who knows what they will create and what they will
Mm-hmm.
solve. I love to use the example of there's a black male who created the TV remote control in his doctoral degree. Forgive me for not remembering his name, but that's a discovery, right? Like for me, I'm
Mhm.
incredibly indebted and thankful for this man for this, TV remote control. It's so small, in our mind, but the idea it had to be created. And so that seed
Right.
was planted very much early on. And so for first gen students, you belong in graduate education. You belong here and you have something to bring. Underrepresented minorities, you have something to bring. White students, you have
Mhm.
something to bring. Everybody has something to contribute. And we need it. We need more of it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think this is actually a nice segue and kind of one of the other questions I wanted to ask you, which is, I think that it's great to try and go to schools where it's been done before, right? Where you've seen that there are students from your ethnic group or similar to you that have graduated consistently from these organizations. And I also feel like, because of the nature of the fact that graduate school is still majority white, there's probably a lot of schools that this is not the case, right? And there's probably, programs that, have all the academic things that a student wants, but they don't have that profile or that history of, being welcoming to the underrepresented minorities. And I'm curious, basically, like what advice you'd have for people that maybe are either going into that kind of a situation or considering it, right? Where they
Hmm.
would be pioneering a little bit more and they would unfortunately probably have to be the one that is like, hey, this is not okay, or hey, you know, this group doesn't exist, right? And like being sort of the pioneer of that. Do you
Yeah.
feel, is that something that you try and generally tell people to avoid, or someone has to do it, and if you're going to do it, here's what I recommend?
Yeah, well, one thing, as a person whose graduate program in personal work is rooted in diversity, equity, and inclusion. For me, my initial thought about what needs to happen or how to address that question is I don't think people should ever put themselves in any potential environment that may be harmful for them physically, mentally, or emotionally. And so
Hmm.
that may look like for some people that, you know what, no, I'm not going to be the first black entry and first black graduate of your statistics program. Um,
Right.
and so that it may look like that. And so for me, a lot of my concern around we'll use the reference of the first, not necessarily the first generation, but for those who may be the first, is I'm looking at the institutions. Why are you still in a position where you're still having first? What
Hmm.
has happened in the existence of your program, particularly if it's at least 30 years or older, that which you're still having first? What is within the culture, within the environment, within your
Right.
processes for recruitment that has yielded this? And now that you're at a position or a place where whether it's an institutional led or it is a state led policy or just for the good of wanting to see something different, what are you going to do to now provide the supports for this individual? And so I give a great example of this for faculty is what does it mean? Start with this question. What does it mean for our first black student to complete this degree? What are the
Hmm.
experiences and challenges they will have to navigate within this institution, within this department, and within the culture of our program? And are we equipped to manage that? And the same question could be asked of the student. As the first person who looks like you from what you see on the website or what you saw in the interview days, what does it look like? What are the culture you're entering into? What's the department you're entering into? And the institution you're entering into? And what do you need to be able to navigate that? And unfortunately, there are
Hmm.
a number of folks who enter in programs who may not always be where historically around their identity. For me, I learned a
Hmm.
lot about. I understood somewhat briefly what it meant to be a male, but I really didn't understand, Kimberly Crenshaw's work around intersectionality and really understand what it meant to be a black male until I was in a program with a majority black women or as a cisgender heterosexual male. I didn't understand what it really meant to be my identity until I entered into a program where there were more individuals who identify as queer, gay, lesbian, transgender, and such until I started this doctoral program. And so for me, even though blackness was not the concern for me, or blackness was not something that was foreign in the program, it was my gender, and it was my sex that began to
Hmm.
make me think about this. And I had not prepared myself for that. And so that required a lot of unlearning. It required a lot of difficult conversations, a lot of reading and being challenged. And so for me, the central part of this connected, whether racial identity or any other identity, is, are you ready to be challenged? Are
Hmm.
you ready to consume what this process is going to be like? It is a lot of reading. It is a lot of writing. It is a lot of thinking about ideas in ways of which you may not have done historically. And you may have the added layer of thinking about those ideas through your other additional identities or the intersection of those identities. And
Hmm.
understand that being one of the only or the first, that your classmates often are not thinking about that information because that's not their lived experience. It doesn't make them a bad person. It just means that's not their lived experience. And so, should you then assume the responsibility to do the additional education and labor of teaching people? You should have to do that, and you get the choice to do that. But there's consequences and outcomes for everything, and all the decisions we make in graduate education. And that consequence may look like extra work on your mental health, right? And so that may look
Hmm.
like, you know what, I'm a woman in this engineering program, and now I have a therapist to help me navigate all these things because they don't understand how patriarchy and misogyny is showing up in all aspects of their work and what they say to me, how they treat me. It may look like
Right.
that. And it may be some things that come up for you that were historical before you started the program, that the program is now beginning to unpack that. I know a number of folks who start their mental health journey in graduate school, start their mental health process of working with therapists or a counselor in that. And I think that could be a really great thing for a number of people. But
Hmm.
you want to be, and I encourage people, be open to what will come. You know, I don't know what life. I never dreamed of leaving the state of Arkansas, and I've lived in Arkansas, Philadelphia, Oklahoma, Georgia, Virginia, and now I'm in North Carolina. I never anticipated that 20 years ago, that or 21 years ago, when I graduated from high school in 2002, that I was going to do that. That wasn't in the plan. But I'm so
Hmm.
thankful that I took the opportunity. And yes, I have been the only one in the program. And I've had to set on my own personal boundaries and I've had to set rules for the program. And that for me, the number one thing, if that is something you're considering, please talk to and ask to speak to alums of the program. Speak to alum who have been a part of the program. Speak to other
Hmm.
alums in other parts of the college or the department. Speak to faculty in other programs or departments. Start to create your network. Find the organizations and folks who support you. I take veterinary medicine as a great example. It's not a lot of historical racial minorities who pursue vet programs. They're highly expensive, $120,000 or more. And so, there's a black vet program, a black vet organization, there's a Hispanic vet organization. There's an Asian American Pacific Islander organization. Tap into that network and begin to ask
Hmm.
questions about what this
Hmm.
experience is like. Your supports and the things you need may not be within the institution. It may come outside of that. And so the sooner you begin to tap into that network and those things, hopefully you'll begin to learn some information, but more importantly, you'll get the representation and you'll get the support you need to see other people who have been there. And that to me is
Right.
super important.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great piece of advice, especially is like there are I'd like because we've launched a program called Achievable for All where we're trying to provide either free or heavily discounted materials to different groups for anything from the ACT to the GRE to our FINRA tests, and there are tons of groups for these underrepresented minorities for all kinds of careers, and they are meant to be that kind of community and camaraderie that you might not have at your individual school, right? It might just be, you by yourself or maybe just a small group of people. And being able to have that and kind of have both someone to kind of like just share in the experience, and then also frankly to be like, hey, did this happen to you? Is this some BS? Right?
Absolutely.
Like
Absolutely.
I think that's very important, and you would be surprised how many there are. I've seen stuff for chemical engineering and a million other, obviously software engineering and a ton of other different things.
Yeah. And
So
even
yeah,
to add
highly
to that,
recommend checking it out.
yeah, and even to add to that, like, and the assumption too of some of the things that I'm sharing is that it only happens at the public R1 institutions. There are a number of online for profit. I mean, I have buddies who work at some of these institutions, the Kaplans, the University of Phoenix, that offer supports and networking opportunities around identity based groups, but they offer it
Hmm.
programs and supports for all students. But it's gonna be um important for you to seek the information out. It's not going to jump out at you. So, and that is
Hmm.
again part of that contribution and creation is you now need to be able to position yourself to go after and seek out the information you're looking for. And if you're not ready to do that work, then I think graduate school might not be for you because this is what a lot of this is.
Right. Well, and it's also just like, for better or for worse, it is kind of coming with the territory, right? It is the reason why graduate schools are still 69%, I think you said, white, right? Like, is
Mm-hmm.
that it's harder for people that are not white to do, and that sucks, and that's not fair. But you can't kind of cover your ears and pretend it's not true either.
No, no, I definitely don't want people to do that. I want people to feel, and that's the premise of what my book is to really help people make an informed decision. And this is what I
Hmm.
do as people's coach. Is we talk as your if I'm your coach, that's we talk about all aspects of who you are as a person. So that again, as I talk about, we help you find a graduate program that meets your needs. And you may have a
Hmm.
specific set of needs around your identity. It may be around the time commitment, or it may be around I can't do classes during the day, whatever that is. That's the things we talk about so that when you enter this, I am not necessarily saying that you won't be surprised by things, but my goal is to lessen the surprises that you will experience and to give
Hmm.
you the support you need that sometimes academia or higher education and graduate education specifically just are not going to be able to provide you with. And so I don't want you to enter in with champagne expectations when
Hmm.
in reality it was glass water. That's what it was.
Yeah.
It was Coca-Cola with a lot of water in it. And so it looks like champagne to you, but it's not, right? It's ginger ale. And so that's my thing for a lot of people that too often folks enter in this not thinking about the gravity of all this. And then you can't know all of it. And that's where an individual like me and my business is here to help you work through that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's the kind of the last question or last comment I had, is just about like, don't be afraid to get support, right? Like, I think that it's hard maybe because sometimes you don't think that you can really get the support you need from like the people that you already get support from, right? Like your family member, obvious, your family maybe hasn't gone to graduate school or maybe, isn't an engineering or whatever, so your program is. And so you can find that support from other people, and I feel like there is, a lot to be said for you don't have to do this alone.
You absolutely do not have to do this alone. And truthfully, you won't finish this degree alone. You're going to rely on the knowledge and expertise of many other individuals to help you get from the beginning to the end of this and to really matriculate through this program, hopefully as successfully as possible. This is to me, graduate education is just another marker of learning to network and work with people like you, and often work with people who are very different than you, but y'all have a synergy and a likeness around a subject matter or a field. And so you have to be willing to tap into that. And I think sometimes, looking back at it, I wish I would have paid more attention in class and did a lot more to boost my GPA. But more
Hmm.
importantly, I wish I would have just taken the chance to go do a master's degree somewhere else. I'm incredibly grateful for the degree that I had, my master's degree, particularly that it was online in the early, onslaught of online education. I didn't know where it was going to go. I actually thought it was going to potentially die out, but here we are, where distance education, online education is the dominant in graduate education. And so I'm thankful that, I had that opportunity and I took advantage of that. And so, yes, I encourage people to really think through the realm of possibilities that are out there. Because once you get in this, there's a lot more support and a lot of things you can do more than what you may have already been aware of.
Right. Yeah, and then any other sort of, as we wrap up this conversation today, any other kind of parting thoughts or advice for people that are either first generation or underrepresented minority that are considering graduate school, and just, yeah, any kind of closing thoughts here?
Absolutely. So, in particular, for those who are looking at public institutions of higher education, and more specifically, I'm going to name Research One institutions. If you are looking for entry into it, here are a few pieces of advice I would recommend. And the first one is going to be for any student. Number one, look for opportunities for application fee waivers. Type in the institution, type in application fee waiver, see if you meet the criteria. Number two piece of advice that I would give every individual, and this is some of the stuff that I cover in the book, but I go into much more detail when I work with a person, is seek out the opportunities that the institution provides for helping you to understand the program. Right. So I'm gonna use the place where I got my graduate degree from, for my doctoral degree, University of Georgia. They have this program called the Graduate Feeders Program, where I think it's an application, you fill it out, and in essence, they provide some funding to help bring individuals to the University of Georgia for a weekend. It's basically a recruitment weekend where you're going to learn about, you get feedback on your personal statement. They talk to you about testing practices. You meet faculty in your department. You meet other potential graduate students. You start your entry. So I encourage you to look for those types of programs. The next thing is, again, bragging on University of Georgia, they have this pathway program. I encourage a lot of folks, especially racial
Mm-hmm.
minorities, to look at pathway programs. One of my to expand on that feeder program, they also have another program. Forgive me for not being able to name the name of it. Maybe it's the feeder program, but Georgia has this program where they work with specific HBCUs and MSIs. So
Mm-hmm.
they work with Morehouse, Spelman, Florida A&M. I think it's Savannah State. Forgive me, I'm forgetting some of them. But basically, they create a pathway program where once you've been admitted, a portion of your funding comes from the graduate school, a portion of your funding comes from the department. But what's more important beyond the funding is you start your program in the summer. So you begin to get acclimated to the area that you're moving at. Because you're coming
Mm-hmm.
from an environment, particularly if you're coming from an HBCU, an environment where majority of people look like you, to often institutions where they don't look like you. Your faculty may not look like you. Students in your class may not look like you. Your neighbor may not even look like you. And so being
Mm-hmm.
able to get acclimated to an area, I think, is super important. The next piece of advice that I have for individuals to really consider is look at the programs now that meet your need. Like I mentioned that I was not a great test taker. I wish I applied now when there was more test optional, right? Like I probably would have looked at
Mm-hmm.
programs that were test optional. So if you don't want to, if money is a factor for you beyond the application fee waiver, look at test optional. But that's not always the case. Like there's some programs you're gonna have to take the test. So utilize the services that are provided, right? Like looking at the services that GRE Snacks and Tyler, you all provided, Achievable, right? Like looking at that as
Mm-hmm.
a great option for you, and saying, you know what, this is an investment in my future. And that's the next piece of advice: is understand that everything you're doing in this process is an investment, right? So it may cost you some funds, but on the return side of that, you'll recoup that if you're utilizing everything that is afforded to you.
Mm-hmm.
Another piece of advice. Let me talk to my working professionals right now who may be listening to this. Ask your employer about educational assistance programs. See what they provide you with. If you're not sure what that conversation needs to look like with human resource or your department or your manager or your director or whoever you work for, and you want some advice, talk to me. Reach out to me. At applytograduateschool.com, and we can talk more about what that needs to look like. And on top of that, for my working professionals, I want you to look at funding fellowships and grants for working professionals, for single parents. A lot of the same categories that apply in undergrad
Mm-hmm.
also show up in grad school. And so I encourage you to look for those. And the last thing I would say for working professionals, um, in terms of really thinking about going back to graduate school, is really considering what the things you're going to have to shift in your life. And this is really advice for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
what you do now in your life before graduate education and while you're doing it, you're not going to be able to give the full capacity to those things. And so when you say yes to graduate school, you are saying no to something else. So I want you to think through and determine what those no's are. And no is not a permanent no. It may be a temporary no. It may be less hours. Another piece of advice is really start thinking about time management and what you want to do different with that. Like to be successful at this. I work with a number of working professionals in particular who work 9 to 5s, and they often say, "I don't have the time to work on this degree. I want to." What time do you get up? You get at 6 a.m. in the morning? Great. What are you doing at 5? Is your brain working and running at 5 a.m.? Then that's what time we're getting up to work on this assignment. You have the time. You can make this work for you. It's going to require a shifting and a sacrifice. And sacrifice is not a bad thing to do. I don't want to speak to the negative aspect. I want to think to the positive. And the last piece of advice I wanted people to think about putting in my own, dissertation research, current research around motivation is, why are you wanting to do this? Why do you want to do this degree? What outcomes are you hoping to achieve? What promotion are you wanting to obtain? What career are you wanting to get into? What thing do you want to create? And really get clear on that thing specifically. Because that's the thing you're going to talk about when you write this personal statement. That's a whole program that we have. We have our own, what we call the PSA, Personal Statement Advantage Program. We help people write their personal statement, edit that, and we talk about that. That why is super important in your experiences are super important in this personal statement. And so know that there are a lot of options for you in terms of graduate education, and you're gonna really want to spend the time thinking through that. I cover a whole lot. Again, 20 questions, and I still got a list of 40 more that I can ask or want you to think about when you decide to pursue graduate degrees. There's room and space for everyone to pursue this, but make smart, wise, financial, mental, physical, emotional decisions. Do not allow your fears to stop you from pursuing this degree. You can do it. Do not let other people's story, as I tell people about even writing a personal statement. A personal statement is a story. It is not your life story, but it is a story. And so other people's stories are not your story. So don't let their experiences determine or dictate your desire to or not to pursue the degree. Because only one name is going to be attached to that diploma when you graduate, and that is yours and not no one else's. And that is my final piece of advice: is see yourself at the end of this. I have a thing at the beginning of the book that I tell people to write down the degree they want and write conferred and take a picture with it, with themselves in it, right? So I want you to see the end before you see the beginning. I want you to see yourself holding that diploma and what all things you are that you want, And so I encourage people again to go to our website at applytograduateschool.com, see what all we offer and are available to you. Read our blog. A lot of information I post about on the blog. And if you're interested in my services or want to just explore or talk more about graduate education, whether you're a student or a faculty member, love to talk to you about it. And I really appreciate this opportunity. I hope something I shared today will be beneficial to those who are listening.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been GRE Snacks, hosted by Tyler from Achievable with Dr. Justin Grimes from Apply to Graduate School. And Achievable has a great online GRE course you can try for free at achievable.me. And if you like it, use the code podcast to get 10% off.